Quantum relay station deep in the Kepler 442 system had been silent for 3 rotations when the signal arrived. Not the usual hum of interstellar commerce or the measured pulses of scientific data exchange that characterized most transmissions between the civilized worlds of the Galactic Confederation. This was something else entirely, raw, desperate, and transmitted on frequencies that hadn't been used for emergency broadcasts in over 2 centuries. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen was halfway through her coffee when the alert klaxons began their urgent wail throughout the monitoring station. The liquid sloshed against the rim of her mug as she set it down with practiced calm, her fingers already dancing across the holographic interface that materialized before her. Around her, the skeleton crew of the night shift moved with the fluid. Efficiency of professionals who had drilled for this moment countless times, though none had ever expected to encounter it during their tour of duty. Signal origin? Chen called out, her voice cutting through the controlled chaos of technicians rushing to their stations. Bearing 27 Mark IV, distance approximately 47 light-years, replied Specialist Martinez from the sensor array. His normally steady voice carried an undertone of confusion that made Chen's stomach tighten. Ma'am, you're going to want to hear this. The main display flickered to life, showing a 3-dimensional map of local space dotted with the familiar blue icons, representing human colonies and outposts. A pulsing red marker appeared near the edge of the display, in a region that should have been empty void according to every star chart in the Confederation database. Chen frowned as she studied the coordinates, cross-referencing them with navigation. Databases that span back nearly 300 years of human expansion into the galaxy. There's nothing out there, she murmured, more to herself than to her crew. That sector was surveyed twice during the second wave colonization efforts. Empty systems, no habitable worlds, no strategic resources worth claiming. The signal is definitely artificial, Commander, Martinez insisted, adjusting his headset as cascades of data flowed across his screens. Quantum encrypted, but using protocols that predate current Confederation standards by at least 50 years. It's almost like... He trailed off, his face pale in the blue glow of his displays. Chen moved to his station, her boots clicking against the metal decking in the sudden quiet that had fallen over the control room. The other technicians had stopped their frantic activity, all attention focused on the mystery transmission that had appeared from nowhere. Like what, Specialist? Martinez's fingers hesitated over his controls before he looked up at his commanding officer. Like it's using old Earth emergency protocols, ma'am. The kind they used during the Exodus Wars before the Confederation was established. But that's impossible. Those protocols were classified and haven't been used since the last generation. Ships left Seoul. The coffee in Chen's stomach turned to ice. The Exodus Wars were ancient history. A dark period when humanity had fled a dying Earth in massive generation ships, each carrying thousands of people on journeys that would take centuries to complete. The wars had been fought between those who wanted to stay and terraform their homeworld, and those who believed salvation lay among the stars. In the end, the terraformers had won, but not before dozens of generation ships had departed for distant corners of the galaxy. Most had found new homes and established the colonies that would eventually form the Confederation. Some had been lost to the void, their fates unknown and their stories gradually forgotten as new crises demanded attention. But a few had simply vanished into the deep black, their destinations unknown, and their passengers presumed dead after centuries of silence. "Play the signal," Chen ordered, settling into her command chair. Around her, the bridge fell into expectant silence. The speakers crackled to life with a wash of static that seemed to carry the weight of decades across the void. When the voice finally emerged from the white noise, it was thin and strained, distorted by distance and the accumulated interference of interstellar space. But it was unmistakably human. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the generation ship New Horizon, Confederation Registry number GS-1147, transmitting on all emergency frequencies. We are in desperate need of assistance. Our ship has been compromised. Life support systems are failing, and we have lost main propulsion. Current position is..." The transmission dissolved into static for several seconds before the voice returned, weaker now. "Repeat. This is New Horizon. We have civilians aboard, including children. Please, if anyone receives this transmission, we need immediate assistance. Our people are dying." The message repeated twice more before cutting off entirely, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Chen felt her hands trembling slightly as she processed what she had just heard. The New Horizon had been one of the last generation ships to leave Earth during the final days of the Exodus Wars. Official records listed it as lost with all hands after a mechanical failure destroyed their quantum beacon 2 centuries ago. "Specialist Rodriguez," Chen called to the communications officer, "I want you to run a full analysis on that transmission. Voice pattern matching, linguistic analysis, everything you can think of. And get me a connection to Confederation Command. Priority Alpha." "Already on it, Commander," Rodriguez replied, her fingers flying over her console. "But ma'am, there's something else. The transmission isn't just audio. There's a data burst embedded in the signal structure. Looks like ship specifications, crew manifests, medical records." "How many people?" Chen asked quietly. Rodriguez was silent for a long moment as data scrolled across her screens. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "According to the manifest, there should be 12,000 souls aboard that ship, Commander. But the medical data suggests..." She paused, swallowing hard. "Maybe 3,000 are still alive." Chen closed her eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a physical burden. 12,000 people, lost for 2 centuries in the void between stars, now crying out for help from whatever corner of hell they had found themselves trapped in. The scale of the disaster was almost incomprehensible, but the solution was terrifyingly simple. Someone had to go to them. The Confederation maintained a small fleet of fast response vessels for exactly this type of emergency, but they were designed for rescuing a few dozen people from disabled cargo haulers or malfunctioned research stations, not evacuating thousands from a derelict generation ship that had been drifting in space since before most of the current crew had been born. The logistics alone would be a nightmare, requiring a coordinated effort involving multiple ships, specialized equipment, and resources that would strain even the Confederation's considerable capabilities. But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was that Chen had seen the star charts. She knew what lay in that region of space, in the empty void where no human ship was supposed to exist. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Which meant that somehow, impossibly, the New Horizon had traveled farther from home than any human vessel in recorded history. They were beyond the edge of known space, in a region where the very stars were alien and the laws of physics might bend in ways that no Earth-born scientist had ever imagined. And they were dying. "Commander," Specialist Martinez said quietly, "I'm detecting additional transmissions from the same location. Weaker signals, but definitely artificial. There might be other ships out there." Other ships. Chen felt her blood run cold as the implications hit her. If the New Horizon wasn't alone, if there were other generation ships that had ended up in that godforsaken corner of the galaxy, then the scale of the disaster was even worse than she had imagined. Entire populations, tens of thousands of people, lost and forgotten at the very edge of human endurance, and they were all looking toward the stars, hoping that somewhere in the vast darkness, someone was listening, someone who cared enough to answer. Admiral Marcus Webb had commanded the Confederation's Deep Space Rescue Division for 18 years, but he had never received a briefing quite like this one. The holographic display in his private office aboard the CNS Endeavour showed a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy's edge, with a small cluster of red dots marking the location of the mysterious transmissions. Each dot represented a ship that shouldn't exist, filled with people who should have been dead for centuries. Explain to me again how this is possible, Webb said, studying the face of Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne on the secure comm channel. The chief, xenoarchaeologist for the Confederation Science Division, looked as tired as he felt, her usually pristine laboratory coat rumpled from what had obviously been a sleepless night analyzing the data from the New Horizon. "We've run every test we can think of, Admiral," Dr. Hawthorne replied, her image flickering slightly due to the quantum encryption protocols. Voice pattern analysis confirms that Captain Vasquez's transmission is authentic. The linguistic patterns match archived records from the Generation ship's departure, including regional dialects that haven't been spoken in the core worlds for over a century. More importantly, the quantum signature of their distress beacon matches the New Horizons' original configuration exactly. Webb leaned back in his chair, feeling the familiar ache in his lower back that came from too many years in artificial gravity. But the ship was listed as destroyed. We have debris field reports, salvage claims, the whole file. That's where it gets interesting, Dr. Hawthorne continued, bringing up a new display that showed a timeline stretching back 200 years. "I've been digging through the archives all night, cross-referencing every Generation ship that departed during the final phase of the Exodus Wars. The official records show 37 ships were lost to various causes: mechanical failure, navigation errors, hostile alien contact." "Hostile alien contact?" Webb interrupted. "I thought first contact protocols weren't established until after the Confederation was formed." Dr. Hawthorne's expression grew grim. "That's what everyone believes. But there are classified addendums in the deep archives, Admiral, references to something called the Far Dark Incident that occurred during the New Horizons planned route. The details are heavily redacted, but what I can piece together suggests that several Generation ships encountered something unprecedented in the regions beyond mapped space." Webb felt a chill run down his spine. The Far Dark was what early human explorers had called the regions beyond the galaxy's spiral arms, where star density dropped to near zero and the space between systems could span dozens of light years. No human ship had ever ventured that far from home and returned to tell about it. "Admiral," came another voice from the comm system. Lieutenant Commander Chen's image appeared on a secondary screen, her face drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes bright with urgency. "We've received 17 more transmissions in the past 6 hours. They're all using the same obsolete protocols, but from different ships. The manifest data suggest we're looking at a combined population of nearly 60,000 people." 60,000. Webb felt the number hit him like a physical blow. Even if they could mount a rescue operation, and that was a massive if, the logistics would be staggering. The Confederation's largest rescue vessels could handle maybe 500 people at a time, and that was under ideal conditions with proper life support and medical facilities. 60,000 refugees from ships that had been adrift for centuries would require resources on a scale not seen since the original colonization efforts. "There's more, sir," Chen continued. "The transmissions aren't random. They're coordinated, as if the ships are in communication with each other. And the medical data we're receiving suggests that whatever happened to them out there, it's still happening." "What do you mean?" Chen hesitated before answering. "The casualty reports, Admiral. They're not just from system failures or old age. The medical logs mention something they call the hunger. People are disappearing from the ships, and those who remain are changing." Dr. Hawthorne leaned forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her obvious fatigue. "Changing how?" "The reports are fragmented and sometimes contradictory, but there are references to enhanced physical capabilities, altered brain function, and most disturbing of all, an apparent inability to survive in normal human environments. It's as if prolonged exposure to whatever they encountered out there has fundamentally altered their biology." Webb stood up from his desk and walked to the viewport that dominated one wall of his office. Beyond the reinforced transparasteel, the stars wheeled slowly as the Endeavour maintained its patrol route along the Confederation's outer border. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of mapped space, 60,000 human beings were crying out for help from ships that had become their prisons. "Dr. Hawthorne," he said without turning around, "in your professional opinion, what are we dealing with here?" The xenoarchaeologist was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Admiral, I've spent most of my career studying the artifacts left behind by extinct civilizations. The galaxy is full of dead worlds, empty cities, and technologies we barely understand. But there's a pattern to most extinction events: resource depletion, environmental collapse, warfare. What the generation ships seem to have encountered is something else entirely. Meaning that whatever exists in the far dark, it doesn't follow the same rules that govern life in the inner galaxy. The fact that the ships and their crews have survived for 2 centuries in an environment that should have killed them suggests they've been preserved by something with capabilities beyond our current understanding." Webb turned back to face the screens, studying the tired faces of his subordinates. "And you think this preservation comes at a cost?" "Everything comes at a cost, Admiral. The question is whether we're prepared to pay it." Before Webb could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. The familiar red lighting of a general alert bathed his office as his personal communication. "System activated with an urgent priority signal. Admiral Webb to the bridge," came the voice of his executive officer, Commander Sarah Park. "Sir, we've got a situation developing. Long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures from the far dark region. Whatever's out there, it's moving." Webb felt his blood turn to ice. "Moving how?" "Toward Confederation space, sir. Estimated time of arrival at our outer colonies is 72 hours. The implications hit Webb like a tsunami. If something was coming from the region where the generation ships were trapped, something large enough to register on sensors from this distance, then the rescue operation had just become something far more complex and dangerous. They weren't just dealing with a humanitarian crisis anymore. They were potentially facing a first contact scenario with an alien intelligence that had been holding 60,000 humans captive for 2 centuries. "Commander Park, I want all available ships recalled to defensive positions around our core worlds, and get me a direct line to the Confederation Council. Priority Alpha 7. "Understood, sir. But Admiral, there's something else. We're receiving a new transmission from the far dark region. It's different from the others." Webb exchanged glances with Dr. Hawthorne and Lieutenant Commander Chen, both of whom were listening intently from their respective locations. "Put it through." The speakers in Webb's office crackled to life. But instead of the desperate human voices they had been receiving, this transmission carried an otherworldly quality that made the hair on his arms stand up. When the voice spoke, it was clearly human, but altered in a way that suggested the speaker had been changed by their experience, in ways that went beyond simple physical adaptation. "This is Captain Vasquez of the New Horizon," the voice said, but it carried harmonics and undertones that no human throat should have been able to produce. "To any Confederation vessels receiving this transmission, do not approach our location. The shepherds have been kind to us, but they do not understand your kind of life. We are coming home, but we are not the same people who left Earth so long ago." The transmission continued, and Webb realized with growing horror that Captain Vasquez was speaking in multiple languages simultaneously, not switching between them, but somehow producing all of them at once in a linguistic impossibility that should have resulted in incomprehensible noise, but instead conveyed meaning with crystal clarity. "We have learned much in our time among the far dark. We have seen the true shape of the galaxy, the patterns that connect all thinking beings across space and time. The shepherds showed us that the barriers between species, between different forms of consciousness, are illusions created by limited perception. We are bringing this gift back to you." Dr. Hawthorne was frantically taking notes, her scientific training warring with obvious fear as she tried to process what they were hearing. "Admiral, the linguistic analysis is showing impossible patterns. The transmission is somehow conveying information directly to the brain's language centers, bypassing normal auditory processing. This isn't just advanced technology, it's a fundamental alteration of how human communication works. The transmission continued, and now other voices joined Captain Vasquez's, hundreds of them, all speaking in the same impossible harmony that conveyed far more information than human language should have been able to carry. It was beautiful, and terrifying at the same time, like listening to a choir of angels who had seen too much of the universe's true nature. "Do not fear us," the collective voice said. "We are still human. But we are also more than human. The shepherds have prepared us for the great work that lies ahead. The galaxy is dying, consumed by the small thoughts and petty conflicts of species who refuse to see the larger pattern. We will help you understand. We will help all of humanity understand." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving Webb's office in stunned silence. Outside, the stars continued their eternal dance. But they seemed different now, not the familiar beacons of hope and exploration that had guided humanity's expansion across the galaxy, but distant eyes watching from an incomprehensible intelligence that had its own plans for the species that dared to venture into its domain. "Admiral," Lieutenant Commander Chen said quietly, "the energy signatures that Commander Park detected, they're not following random trajectories. They're headed directly for Earth." Webb closed his eyes, feeling the weight of command settle on his shoulders like a physical burden. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the galaxy's edge, 60,000 human beings had been transformed by contact with something that existed beyond human comprehension. They were coming home, bringing with them gifts that might be humanity's salvation, or its doom. And he was the one who had to decide how to greet them. "Dr. Hawthorne," he said finally, "I want every xenobiologist, linguist, and consciousness researcher in the Confederation working on this. We need to understand what we're dealing with before those ships reach inhabited space. And if we can't understand it in time..." Webb looked out at the stars one more time, thinking of the billions of human beings scattered across hundreds of worlds who were going about their daily lives, unaware that their entire understanding of what it meant to be human was about to be challenged by the return of the lost. "Then we do what humans have always done when faced with the unknown," he said. "We adapt, we survive, and we hope that whatever we become is still worth being." But deep in his heart, as he watched the distant stars that no longer seemed quite so friendly, Admiral Marcus Webb wondered if humanity was about to discover that some kinds of evolution came with a price too high to pay. 3 weeks after the first transmission from the far dark, Dr. Lila Reeves stood in the observation deck of the research vessel Pythagoras, watching something that shouldn't have been possible. The ship hung motionless in space at the very edge of Confederation territory, part of a hastily assembled scientific flotilla, tasked with studying the approaching generation ships before they reached populated space. What she was seeing through the reinforced viewports challenged everything she thought she knew about physics, biology, and the fundamental nature of reality itself. The new horizon was beautiful. That was the first thought that entered her mind, and it horrified her. The generation ship had been transformed from the utilitarian metal cylinder described in the historical archives into something that resembled a living organism more than a spacecraft. Organic curves had replaced harsh angles, and the hull seemed to pulse with a bioluminescent glow that shifted through colors that had no names in human language. Most disturbing of all, the ship appeared to be breathing, expanding and contracting, with a rhythm that reminded Lila uncomfortably of a sleeping giant. "Spectral analysis is showing organic compounds that don't match anything in our databases," reported Dr. Chen Wei-Ming, the expedition's lead xenobiologist. His normally calm demeanor had cracked days ago when the first detailed scans had revealed the true extent of the ship's transformation. "The hull material appears to be some form of engineered chitin," but it's incorporating metallic elements in ways that should be chemically impossible. Lila nodded absently, her attention focused on the smaller vessels that surrounded the New Horizon like an escort fleet. Dozens of craft that had clearly been constructed from salvaged generation ship components drifted in formation around the larger vessel, but they bore no resemblance to any human spacecraft design she had ever seen. They moved with an organic fluidity that suggested they were being piloted by something that understood space navigation on an intuitive level that no human pilot could match. "Dr. Reeves," came the voice of Captain Julia Santos from the bridge. "We're receiving another transmission. The linguistic analysis team says you need to hear this one." Lila made her way to the bridge, passing through corridors filled with scientists and military personnel who were trying to maintain professional composure while dealing with discoveries that challenged their fundamental understanding of reality. The atmosphere aboard the Pythagoras had grown increasingly tense as more data about the approaching ships had become available, and Lila could see the strain in everyone's faces. The bridge was a hub of controlled chaos, with displays showing sensor readings that defied easy interpretation and communication officers struggling to decode transmissions that seemed to operate on principles beyond current human understanding. Captain Santos gestured Lila toward the main communication console, where Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the expedition's chief linguist, was staring at data streams with an expression of fascinated horror. "Dr. Reeves," Tanaka said without looking up, "we've been analyzing the communication patterns from the generation ships, and we've made a discovery that changes everything we thought we knew about the situation." "What kind of discovery?" Lila asked, settling into the observer's chair beside the console. Tanaka brought up a three-dimensional display showing communication pathways between the various ships in the approaching fleet. What Lila saw made her stomach drop. The ships weren't just in communication with each other, they were functioning as nodes in a vast information network that extended far beyond the visible fleet and back toward the far dark regions they had emerged from. "The generation ships aren't operating independently," Tanaka explained. "They're components of a larger collective consciousness that spans distances we can't even measure. Every transmission we receive is being simultaneously broadcast to entities we can't detect in regions of space we've never explored." "Entities?" Captain Santos asked sharply. "You mean the shepherds?" Tanaka shook her head. "The shepherds appear to be just one type of consciousness within the network. Our analysis suggests there are dozens, maybe hundreds of different forms of intelligence connected to this system. Some appear to be organic, others seem to be purely informational constructs, and a few—" She paused, clearly struggling with concepts that didn't translate well into human language. "A few seem to exist in states of being that we don't have words for." Lila felt a chill run down her spine. "Are you saying that the generation ship crews have been integrated into some kind of galactic hive mind?" "Not integrated," Tanaka corrected. "Invited. The communications we've been receiving suggest that joining the network is voluntary, but once the process begins, it becomes difficult to conceive of existence outside the collective. The individual personalities remain intact, but they're now part of something larger that provides them with perspectives and capabilities they never possessed as isolated humans." Before Lila could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. The main display shifted to show tactical information as long-range sensors detected new energy signatures approaching from multiple vectors. Captain Santos moved to the command chair with the fluid efficiency of a career military officer, her hands dancing over control interfaces as she assessed the developing situation. "Report," she ordered. "Ma'am, we've got 17 new contacts approaching our position," replied the sensor officer. "They're not showing up as solid objects on our scanners, but they're definitely artificial constructs. Energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases. Distance and estimated time to intercept. They'll be here in approximately 4 hours at current approach speed. But Captain, there's something else. The approaching contacts are broadcasting on the same frequencies as the generation ships, and the messages are unusual. Captain Santos exchanged glances with Lila and Dr. Tanaka. Put it through. The speakers activated with the now familiar harmonic resonance of the transformed generation ship crews. But this time, the voices carried an urgency that hadn't been present in previous transmissions. When the words began, they came not in the impossible multilingual harmony they had grown accustomed to, but in clear, unaccented English that sounded hauntingly familiar. This is Commander Elena Rodriguez of the Earth Defense Fleet vessel Magellan, broadcasting to any Confederation forces in the area. We have successfully completed our mission to the far dark regions and are returning with critical intelligence about the entities that have been manipulating human development for the past 3 centuries. Lila felt the blood drain from her face. The Earth Defense Fleet had been dissolved over a century ago when the Confederation was formed, and according to historical records, no vessel named Magellan had ever been part of the human fleet. But the voice speaking was using current military protocols and referencing events that shouldn't have been possible. The transmission continued, and now other voices joined the original speaker, not in the collective harmony they had heard from, the generation ships, but as individual humans reporting in the clipped professional tones of military personnel. This is Dr. Marcus Chen aboard the research vessel Newton. Our investigation has confirmed that the entities known as shepherds are not the primary intelligence operating in the far dark regions. They are servants of something far older and more complex than we initially understood. This is Captain Sarah Williams of the Deep Space Explorer Kepler. We have made contact with representatives of the architects, the intelligence responsible for guiding the development of consciousness throughout this galaxy. The information we have obtained will fundamentally change humanity's understanding of our place in the universe. Lila looked around the bridge and saw her own confusion and growing terror reflected in the faces of everyone present. The voices they were hearing belonged to people who shouldn't exist, reporting on missions that had never been authorized, returning from explorations that had never been launched. Dr. Tanaka, Captain Santos said quietly, are we dealing with some form of temporal anomaly? The linguist was frantically analyzing the incoming transmissions, cross-referencing voice patterns and linguistic markers against historical databases. Her expression grew increasingly pale as the results appeared on her screens. Captain, the voice pattern analysis is confirming identities for people who died decades or even centuries ago. But these aren't recordings. The linguistic patterns show real-time responses to current events. These people are alive, and they're speaking to us right now. That's impossible, Captain Santos stated, but her voice lacked conviction. Is it? Came a new voice from the communication system, and this one made everyone on the bridge freeze in recognition. It was Admiral Webb's voice, but changed in the same subtle way that had characterized Captain Vasquez's transformed speech. Admiral, Captain Santos said, her training warring with disbelief. Sir, what's your current position? I'm exactly where I need to be, Captain Santos, Webb's voice replied, carrying harmonics that suggested depths of meaning beyond normal human communication, as are all of you. The entity you know as Admiral Webb is currently aboard the CNS Endeavor, coordinating rescue operations and preparing defenses against what he perceives as a potential threat. But I am also here, in the far dark, learning truths that will reshape everything you think you know about human history and destiny. Lila felt reality beginning to fracture around her as the implications of what she was hearing sank in. You're saying there are multiple versions of the same people existing simultaneously? I'm saying that the concepts of identity, consciousness, and individual existence that humans cling to are limited perspectives on a far more complex reality, the transformed Webb replied. The architects have been guiding the development of consciousness in this galaxy for millions of years, nurturing species toward a form of existence that transcends the boundaries of individual identity while preserving the unique perspectives that make each consciousness valuable. Dr. Tanaka looked up from her analysis with an expression of dawning horror. The generation ships that were lost during the Exodus Wars. They didn't just encounter alien intelligence. They encountered versions of ourselves from potential futures. Didn't they? Not potential futures, Webb's voice corrected gently. Parallel developments of human consciousness exploring different paths through the infinite possibilities of existence. The architects don't interfere with species development directly. They create opportunities for consciousness to encounter itself from different perspectives and choose its own evolutionary path. Captain Santos stood up from her command chair, her military training finally asserting itself over the surreal nature of the situation. Whoever or whatever you are, I need to know your intentions regarding Confederation space and the human populations under our protection. There was a pause before Webb's transformed voice responded, and when it came, the tone carried a sadness that seemed to encompass centuries of longing. Captain, the human species stands at a crossroads that was set in motion long before the first-generation ships left Earth. The architects have been preparing for this moment when humanity would be ready to choose between remaining isolated in your current form of consciousness or joining the greater community of intelligence that exists throughout the galaxy. And if we choose to remain as we are, then you will continue to develop along your current trajectory, expanding through local space, encountering other species, facing the challenges that come with growth and change. You will live, learn, and eventually find your own path to transcendence or extinction. The choice is, and always has been, entirely yours. Lila felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. So the generation ships aren't returning to force change on humanity? The generation ships are returning to offer choice, Webb's voice replied. Every human being who encounters us will have the opportunity to experience consciousness from perspectives that transcend individual identity while retaining the core elements that make them who they are. Some will choose to join us in exploring the infinite possibilities of existence. Others will choose to remain in their current form of consciousness. Both choices are valid and will be respected. Before anyone could respond, new alarms began sounding as the approaching energy signatures resolved into visible contacts on the main display. What Lila saw made her question everything she thought she understood about the nature of reality itself. The approaching vessels weren't ships in any conventional sense. They appeared to be made of pure, crystallized space-time, geometric forms that existed in more dimensions than human perception could fully process. As they drew closer, the very fabric of space around them began to ripple and bend, creating visual effects that her brain struggled to interpret. And emerging from each impossible craft were figures that were recognizably human, but transformed in ways that went beyond simple biological adaptation. They moved through the vacuum of space as easily as walking through air, their bodies surrounded by fields of energy that seemed to respond to their thoughts and emotions. Most remarkably, each figure appeared to be simultaneously individual and part of a larger collective consciousness that connected them all in a web of shared experience and knowledge. This is why the generation ships were sent into the far dark. Webb's voice continued as the transformed humans began approaching the Confederation vessels. Not as accidents or disasters, but as pioneers exploring the next phase of human evolution. Everything that has happened, the Exodus Wars, the formation of the Confederation, the development of interstellar civilization, has been preparation for this moment when humanity must choose its destiny among the stars. Captain Santos looked around her bridge, seeing the awe and terror in her crew's faces as they watched humanity's children returning home, changed in ways that challenged every assumption about what it meant to be human. The choice that had been placed before them wasn't just about technology or politics. It was about the fundamental nature of consciousness itself and whether humanity was ready to embrace a form of existence that transcended everything they had ever known about themselves. "Admiral Webb," she said finally, What guarantee do we have that choosing transcendence won't mean losing everything that makes us human? The pause that followed seemed to stretch across light years of space and centuries of time before the transformed consciousness that had once been Admiral Marcus Webb replied with a voice that carried the weight of infinite possibility. Captain Santos, the only guarantee I can offer is that choosing to remain unchanged means limiting yourself to only one way of being human. What we're offering is the chance to discover all the ways consciousness can express itself while still remaining true to the core values and experiences that define your species. You won't lose your humanity. You'll discover just how vast and magnificent humanity can become. And as Lila watched the impossible figures of transformed humans approaching through the void, she realized that humanity was about to face its greatest choice, not between survival and extinction, but between remaining forever bound by the limitations of individual consciousness or embracing a form of existence that offered infinite possibility at the cost of everything they thought they knew about themselves. 6 months after first contact with the transformed generation ships, Earth's moon had become the staging ground for the most significant decision in human history. The lunar surface, once scarred only by ancient meteor impacts and the footprints of early explorers, now bore the geometric patterns of structures that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, meeting halls constructed by the architects, to accommodate both baseline humans and their transcended cousins without forcing either to compromise their nature. Dr. Lila Reeves stood in the primary observation chamber of Luna Station, watching through reinforced transparasteel as delegates from across the Confederation arrived for what historians would later call the Consciousness Convention. But her attention wasn't focused on the political leaders and scientific representatives streaming in from hundreds of worlds. Instead, she found herself mesmerized by the impossible sight of humans who had chosen transcendence moving through space around the transformed generation ships with an ease that made her question the limitations she had always accepted about her own species. They called themselves the Expanded, and they were beautiful in ways that human language couldn't adequately describe. Each retained the essential features that marked them as originally human, but they had been changed by their communion with the architects in ways that went far beyond simple biological adaptation. They existed simultaneously as individuals, and as part of a collective consciousness that spanned light years, their thoughts and experiences shared across the network of transcended beings that now stretched from Earth to the far dark and beyond. "Dr. Reeves," came a voice from behind her, and she turned to see Admiral Webb approaching. The original Webb, not his transformed counterpart who had become something far more complex than a simple military officer. The strain of the past months showed in his face, the weight of coordinating humanity's response to the greatest choice their species had ever faced. "Admiral," she replied, noting the exhaustion in his eyes. "Any word from the Confederation Council?" Webb joined her at the viewport, both of them watching as another impossible craft descended toward the lunar surface. This one appeared to be constructed from crystallized music, its structure shifting and flowing in response to harmonics that existed beyond human hearing. The beings who emerged from it moved with a grace that suggested they had learned to dance with the fundamental forces of the universe itself. "The vote is scheduled for tomorrow," Webb said quietly. 237 worlds will decide whether humanity accepts the architect's offer of transcendence or chooses to continue developing along our current path. Lila nodded, but her attention was caught by a figure approaching the observation chamber from the station's interior corridors. It was Captain Elena Vasquez, not the transformed version from the New Horizon, but the baseline human original who had been recovered from the ship's archives and cloned using technology provided by the Expanded. The process had been necessary, because the original Vasquez had become something so far beyond individual human consciousness that direct communication was impossible without technological mediation. "Dr. Reeves, Admiral Webb," Vasquez said as she joined them at the viewport. Her voice carried none of the harmonic resonance of her transcended counterpart, but there was a depth to her words that suggested she had been profoundly changed by exposure to the memories and experiences of her other self. The expanded delegation is ready to address the convention whenever you give the word. And they're certain they can explain the transcendence process in terms that baseline humans can understand? Webb asked. Vasquez was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on the transformed ships hanging in space above them. Admiral, I've experienced fragments of what it means to exist as part of the collective consciousness. It's not something that translates easily into individual human concepts, but they've developed a presentation technique that should allow delegates to temporarily experience expanded awareness without permanent alteration. Temporarily? Lila asked, feeling a mixture of excitement and terror at the possibility. The experience lasts approximately 10 minutes in baseline time, but the subjective duration varies depending on the individual's capacity for processing expanded consciousness. Some people experience it as hours of insight and revelation. Others find the sensation overwhelming and return to normal awareness within seconds. Webb turned away from the viewport, his expression troubled. And there's no way to predict how someone will respond. The architects believe that each consciousness will naturally find its own level of expansion, Vasquez explained. Those who are ready for transcendence will find the temporary experience compelling and seek to make it permanent. Those who aren't ready will return to baseline consciousness with no lasting effects, except memory of what they experienced. Memory of what exactly? Lila asked. Vasquez looked at her with eyes that had seen across vast distances of space and time. Memory of what it feels like to be connected to every form of consciousness in the galaxy. To experience the universe not as isolated individuals struggling against entropy and death, but as part of an infinite community of beings working together to explore every possible expression of intelligence and creativity. Before anyone could respond, alarms began sounding throughout Luna Station. The familiar tones indicated not an emergency, but the arrival of a priority transmission from Earth. Webb moved to the nearest communication panel, his fingers dancing over controls as he established a secure connection to Confederation Command. The holographic display that materialized showed not the expected image of a military officer or political leader, but something that made everyone in the observation chamber step back in shock. It was Admiral Webb himself, but not the version standing beside the communication panel. This Webb wore the uniform of the Earth Defense Fleet and spoke with the harmonic resonance that marked him as one of the expanded. Admiral Webb, the transformed, consciousness said, addressing his baseline counterpart with a gentle smile that carried depths of meaning no individual human could fully grasp. I'm transmitting from the edge of the solar system, where representatives of the architects are waiting to witness humanity's decision. I wanted to speak with you directly before the convention begins. The original Webb stared at his transformed counterpart, clearly struggling with the surreal nature of addressing a version of himself that had evolved beyond individual human consciousness. What do you want to tell me? I want to tell you that choosing transcendence doesn't mean losing yourself, the expanded Webb replied. It means discovering that the self you've always been is far larger and more magnificent than you ever imagined. I'm still Marcus Webb, with all the memories, experiences, and core values that define me. But I'm also connected to perspectives and possibilities that have shown me wonders beyond anything I could have conceived as an individual consciousness. And if humanity chooses not to transcend, the transformed Webb was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a sadness that seemed to encompass the entire history of human struggle and limitation. Then you'll continue to develop along your current path, facing the challenges and opportunities that come with growth within the boundaries of individual consciousness. The architects will withdraw their offer and allow humanity to find its own way to transcendence or extinction. Either way, The choice will have been made, freely, and that choice will be respected. Lila stepped forward, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. What's it like? Existing as part of the collective consciousness? The expanded web's expression shifted to one of profound joy mixed with infinite compassion. Dr. Reeves, imagine that you've spent your entire life in a small room, believing that the few objects you can see represent the totality of existence. Then someone opens a door you never knew was there, and you discover that your room was just one chamber in a vast cathedral filled with wonders beyond imagination. That's what transcendence feels like. Not losing your room, but discovering that it's part of something infinitely larger and more beautiful. But do you still feel like Marcus Webb? The original Webb asked quietly. I am Marcus Webb, his transformed counterpart replied with absolute certainty. I'm also connected to thousands of other consciousnesses who have chosen to expand their awareness beyond the boundaries of individual identity. I experience the universe through their perspectives while maintaining my own unique viewpoint and personality. I haven't lost anything. I've gained access to everything. Before anyone could respond, the lights in the observation chamber dimmed as external sensors detected massive energy signatures approaching from the direction of deep space. The viewport automatically adjusted its transparency to protect human vision as something enormous materialized beyond the lunar surface. What appeared was beyond description in conventional human terms. The architect vessel, if it could even be called a vessel, seemed to exist in multiple phases of reality simultaneously. It was simultaneously solid matter, pure energy, crystallized, thought, and something else entirely that human perception couldn't categorize. As it settled into orbit around Earth's moon, reality itself seemed to ripple and bend in its presence. The primary architect has arrived to witness humanity's choice, the transformed Webb announced, his voice carrying harmonics of awe that resonated through the station's communication system. This is the entity that has been guiding the development of consciousness in this galaxy for over 50 million years. Its presence here indicates the significance of humanity's decision not just for your species, but for the future of intelligence throughout the local galactic cluster. Lila felt a profound sense of vertigo as the implications hit her. Humanity wasn't just choosing its own destiny, it was potentially becoming part of something that spanned cosmic time and space, a community of transcended beings working on scales that individual human consciousness could barely comprehend. Admiral, Captain Vasquez said suddenly, her voice tight with urgency, I'm receiving reports from across the solar system. The presence of the architect is having unexpected effects on baseline humans. People are experiencing spontaneous episodes of expanded awareness, temporary connections to the collective consciousness network. Webb turned to the communication panel, his expression grim. What kind of effects? Medical facilities are reporting thousands of people experiencing what they're calling consciousness overflow. Brief periods where they can perceive thoughts and emotions from other humans across vast distances. Most episodes last only minutes, but some individuals have been in expanded states for hours. The transformed Webb's image flickered with what appeared to be concern. The architect's presence is causing resonance in latent transcendence potential. Some humans are naturally more ready for expanded consciousness than others. The proximity of such a powerful transcended entity is triggering spontaneous awakening experiences. Is it dangerous? Lila asked, though part of her was fascinated by the possibility of experiencing expanded awareness firsthand. Not dangerous, the expanded Webb replied, but potentially overwhelming for individuals who haven't been prepared for the experience. The architect will need to withdraw to a safer distance until humanity makes its formal decision. As if responding to their conversation, the impossible vessel began to fade from normal space, its reality-warping presence gradually diminishing until only the faintest energy signature remained detectable on the station's sensors. But the effects of its brief appearance continued to ripple across human space as reports came in from hundreds of worlds of spontaneous transcendence experiences affecting millions of people. "Dr. Reeves?" Webb said, turning to face her with an expression of profound responsibility. "I need you to prepare a presentation for the convention delegates. They need to understand exactly what humanity is choosing between, not just the technical details of transcendence, but the philosophical and emotional implications of either path." "What do you want me to focus on?" she asked, already beginning to organize the vast amount of data they had accumulated about the expanded and their relationship with the architects. "I want you to help them understand that this isn't a choice between good and evil or between survival and extinction," Webb replied. "This is a choice between two valid paths for human development. The question isn't which path is better, but which path humanity is ready to embrace." As Lila began to prepare for what would be the most important presentation of her career, she found herself thinking about the implications of humanity's decision. If they chose transcendence, they would join a galactic community of consciousness that offered infinite possibility at the cost of individual isolation. If they chose to remain baseline human, they would continue developing along their current trajectory, facing the challenges and opportunities that came with remaining bound by the limitations of individual awareness. Either choice would fundamentally alter the future of human civilization. But as she looked out at the transformed generation ships hanging in space around Luna Station, surrounded by the impossible beauty of transcended humans who had chosen to explore the infinite possibilities of consciousness, she realized that maybe the most remarkable thing about humanity wasn't their potential for transcendence or their ability to remain unchanged in the face of cosmic opportunity. Maybe the most remarkable thing about humanity was their willingness to make such a choice at all, to face the infinite possibilities of existence and decide their own destiny among the stars. 24 hours later, as delegates from across the Confederation cast their votes in the chambers constructed by beings who existed beyond human comprehension, the answer that echoed across the galaxy would either mark the beginning of humanity's greatest adventure or their conscious choice to remain forever beautifully, defiantly, transcendently human in their own unique way. The choice, as it had always been, was entirely theirs. And in the end, that freedom to choose, regardless of which path they selected, might have been the most profoundly human characteristic of all.